Hello and welcome to this episode of NRI Affairs, and I'm here with Shashi Tharoor, who needs very little introduction. He's, a politician, he's an author, he's a former diplomat, and we are very fortunate to have him here with us in Melbourne, and he's here talking at the India-Australia Institute with Lisa Singh, and we've just got a few minutes, so this will have to be a little bit of a rapid fire.
Sure, anything.
This, The Battle of Belonging is a book that I got last year.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you, in the context of that Battle of Belonging, what are some of the changes you've seen in the Indian diaspora in the way they sort of hold their hyphenated identities and connect with India?
Well, there's been obviously a major change roughly in the late 80s, early 90s when there was, for the first time, an outreach from the government of India to the NRI and the diaspora, who had up to then been told, well, you've gone abroad, you've made your bed, now you lie in it. But from the 90s, or maybe even the late 80s, I would say, the government of India said, no, we need you, we need your support, we need your investments, we need you to open foreign currency bank deposits in India so we can have some access to your money. And suddenly the discovery of the diaspora by the government of India. I was in the diaspora then, so my point of view may be slightly biased, but it really began then, and it's grown, of course, by leaps and bounds. The creation of the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas at the beginning of the century, and other initiatives to create programs to integrate the NRIs and Pravasis more into what's going on at home has proceeded apace. So definitely, I would say the diaspora is more connected and more aware. It's coincided with the much greater ease of communications, travel, the internet. When I went first to the US as a graduate student in the mid-70s, it cost $12 for a 3-minute call, and $12 is probably more than I would spend on a day's food in those days. So it really was an expensive proposition. Today you can not only call home for free on WhatsApp, but you can also see the person on video. So it's a totally different world, and therefore people are much more conscious now of each other. That's number one. Number two, I'd say is that and this is perhaps less happy, is that the divisions that have happened within the country have also started getting reflected abroad. I remember as late as sort of the mid-90s that Indians collectively, I was in America in those days, Indians collectively felt that their job in America was to speak up for India. It didn't matter who was in power, what party, what leader, India was what mattered. That's changed, and I think a lot of Indians now seem to identify principally with a point of view politically that's connected to an Indian party at home, and so you've got BJP supporters and Congress supporters and other groups, including some of the fringe movements like the Khalistanis and so on, all organizing on a more narrow basis than one would perhaps ideally have liked. So that's another significant change that wasn't there earlier. But apart from those two things, I'd say by and large that the Indian community has grown influential in every country they're in, because the numbers are also greater. 1 million in Australia, 4 million in America, I think more like 6 in the UK. So you've got very, very large numbers. And of course in the Gulf countries where they're very, very substantial. And as a result, they can't be ignored, and as a result, India can't be ignored. There's a sense in all these countries that the elected leadership or the rulers of a particular country will always have an interest in keeping on the right side of the significant ethnic group in their countries.
I wanted to ask you, given that we see a shrinking sort of independent media space in India, what role do you think diasporic media like NRI Affairs, for instance, can play in bridging that gap? Because often we talk about things that perhaps the mainstream media would not be allowed to speak of.
Well, I mean, nowadays with the internet, of course, the distinction between domestic media and diaspora media is almost academic, because one can see when you're sitting in the diaspora, you can see Indian media on the internet. When you're sitting in India, you can see diasporic media on the internet, provided there is awareness and provided the connections are there, and you can make people aware and conscious of it. So if you send out links to people,
yes,
they can view them. So yes, I do believe there is a decent possibility that your media could make an impact as well.
You know, Sunita Vishwanath from Hindus for Human Rights often speaks of the Hindu faith having enough to resource us in terms of ethical questions, in terms of moral questions.
That's right.
For contemporary life. And you've written a book about your Hindu faith.
Indeed.
What do you feel then, what are your views of us reclaiming that space and really talking about more liberatory Hinduism, given the strident voices of Hindutva that seem to take
Well, I think increasingly this is contested terrain. There's the point of view that I advocate, which you seem to have sympathy for, but there's also a point of view which is a much more narrow and I would argue bigoted version of the Hindu faith, which is being advocated by the so-called Hindutva movement, which tries to strip Hinduism of its capaciousness, its diversity, its inclusiveness, and instead reduce it to something far more exclusive and far more hostile to other groups. And this is something which I certainly am concerned about and continue to raise my voice against. But it'll be naive to pretend that only one view is ever going to prevail in a country as large and diverse as India, and in a population as large and widespread as the Hindu community of the world.